Welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio coverage of Nonprofit Technology Conference 2015. We're at the Austin, Texas Convention Center. My guests are Lisa Jervis and Jeanine Shimatsu. Their workshop topic is effective distance collaboration. Hint, it's more complicated than vendors like to admit. Lisa Jervis, sitting closest to me, is Principal Consultant for Information Ecology, and Jeanine Shimatsu is IT Specialist at Forward Together. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to have you both. Thank you. Lisa, why don't you get us started? What are nonprofits not really thinking strategically about when they need to collaborate in a virtual office?
Sure. Well, let me tell you a little story that I think is representative of a lot of people's experience.
I love stories.
I got interested in distance collaboration back in 2009. I was working as the operations director for an organization in Oakland, California called the Center for Media Justice. We had 7 staff and 1 location. We just all worked in our office and that was that. And then we hired someone who lived in Chicago. And my ED said to me, "So next week, Amalia needs to be on staff meeting. So figure out how to make that happen."
Okay.
And I was like, oh, I have to think about how to make this happen. We now have this whole employee who lives elsewhere. And, so I was like, well, this is easy. We'll just have her call in to the conference phone. And so every week we started having these staff meetings where the 7 of us would sit around the table and look at the conference phone while Amalia talked to us, and we, and we kind of stopped talking to each other and started all talking to the phone.
Oh.
And, I started noticing all of these ways in which our work was going to have to change in order to accommodate just this one new staff person. We kept growing. We eventually grew to 2 offices and 10 staff. And that staff included 2 people who worked remotely in neither of the offices. So we started to want to see each other in our staff meetings. We had people who could not get files because the VPN wasn't very effective and they couldn't access the file server. There was just this whole constellation of needs that I, as the operations person, had not had an opportunity to fully think through because the ED was like, we hired this person, let's just, go and include her in things now. And it was like, oh, well, there's a whole set of issues to think about.
Jeanine, why don't you help us out? What are some of the things we should be thinking about? And we have plenty of time together, so we'll be able to talk about them. But just as an overview, where should we be thinking?
In terms of, in general?
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of components of effective distance collaboration. There's not only the conferencing piece that Lisa started talking about, there's also file sharing. There is also chat and calendars, how we manage email. There's a whole gambit of stuff where things can go right, but also where they can go wrong. And it's really, really important for organizations to know what their needs are and to be able to meet those needs.
Okay, and it sounds like the organization should be thinking more than a week in advance. From Lisa's story. I'll let Lisa talk about her stories, but more than a week is probably a good idea.
It is a good idea, although that's not always the way it happens, because as Lisa was sharing that story, I was just laughing because very recently I just found out that one of our staff people who work from home just moved. And I didn't find out until after they moved that they are no longer located in New York. They're located in Los Angeles. And that has a lot of implications, such as internet connection and all this. I don't know if they're living with someone, if they are renting, or what the situation with their landlord is like, or any of these things that would really affect how they're going to be working with the rest of staff, how it's going to play into the systems that we already have developed. And so, more than a week or a day would be great.
Okay. Lisa, let's come back. How do we break this down? What should we be thinking about?
Sure.
If we're planning either bringing someone in or, or we're a virtual organization now and we don't feel like we're doing it very smartly.
Sure. Well, there's one main overarching consideration that I think that people often don't realize, and it has to do with the way that the business press and a lot of collaboration tool vendors talk about remote work, they're like, just get a good internet connection and our software and nothing will change and you'll be able to do everything. And, the reality is that things will have to change, and there's overhead involved in remote work. And if you don't plan for it in your organizational plans, in your meeting agendas, and in your individual work plans, then you won't actually have enough time to accomplish the work that you had planned to do. And so I think the most important thing is just to remember to build in that overhead into all of your plans. As far as specific areas of work, there's kind of three main aspects. There's meetings, then there's file sharing, and then there...
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, Jeanine ticked off a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Calendar, chat, email, file sharing, conferencing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's the process of kind of, in a separate piece of work, just choosing your tools and making agreements together as an organization about how they're going to be used.
Okay. Now, Jeanine, let's go back to you. I thought email was an interesting one. Why? I mean, email seems to me to be a fine distance tool without needing any planning. What am I missing?
Well, the email is a great tool, and it doesn't always work the same in all organizations. And I think culturally, my organization in particular uses email a lot, especially because we do have a lot of people who don't work in the same office. You can't do the same drop by, and you can respond whenever you want, and that's great. Email, I think protocols need to be set for email in terms of setting expectations with other people internally with what is appropriate and how your staff is going to work best, just as with any other form of communication.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What are some ideas that you have around what these protocols should be?
Well, that's great. I'm going to have to think about that and come back to you on that.
Well,
go ahead.
I have an answer a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead,
it does depend on the organization. It really is just about making agreements about what's reasonable and what works for the staff. I mean, in one organization that I worked in, we had a 24-hour turnaround time agreement for internal emails. But if you needed something faster than that, you had to use another method. It was an agreement that we made as a staff that for emergencies, you will text or chat or call, because those are more immediate things. Like, people were not expected to be on their email, within 5 minutes. And so you just couldn't email about urgent things.
And then I'm thinking too, is security, is that's an issue for people who are remote? Email preservation. I mean, these things, well, it just has to be thought about. Security, right?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. Security is an issue whether you're remote or not, but it certainly plays into very much what tools you select, who you're willing to have host your files, how you're going to protect those files, what kind of configuration choices you need. And so in kind of determining what I like to call an organization's collaboration profile, security needs are a really important part of that.
Okay. What's this collaboration profile? What is that?
Well, it basically involves assessing your organization to help you choose and configure your tools and make these kinds of communication agreements. And so, because not every organization is going to have the same needs. And so questions to consider are, how many staff do you have? How many time zones are you working across? How many different roles or functions are people fulfilling? Is it just staff that your systems are going to be set up for, or do you also need to include program participants or volunteers in your information systems? And then there are some organizational culture things like Jeanine was getting at about, is email going to be the best way, or do people like to be on the phone, or, those kinds of work style questions. And then, as you noted, there are security questions, like what kinds of information are we storing and transferring? Does it contain any personally identifiable information that may need to be protected and, subject to regulations like HIPAA or others? Is your organization or are your partners and participants potentially targets of information breach attempts by political enemies? I mean, it sounds a little paranoid to say that, but it's real.
Depending on the kind of work you're doing,
exactly,
it could be very real. Yeah,
exactly. So that's all. All of those factors go into choosing what are the most appropriate tools.
Okay, and your communications protocol.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Jeanine, you want to take us to one of the other topics you mentioned, like conferencing or file sharing or calendars?
Let's talk about calendars.
Yes.
Okay. Please do.
I love calendars. My organization works in 3 different time zones right now, and we are currently using Google Calendars. But I think the same principles that I'm about to talk about would apply to if you're using Outlook or many of the other calendaring systems that are available. But I really can't imagine being able to work with other people, especially across geography, without being able to very quickly and very effectively see when people are available and, not have to negotiate meeting time. And you can also get not only when people are available, but you can also get a glance of what people are doing, and you get so much information from being able to view someone's calendar. It's great.
Okay. Yeah. Anything you want to add on calendar, Lisa? No.
I mean, just that sometimes it can be a struggle to actually get people to use an electronic calendar if that's not your organizational culture, and so that's one of the changes that you're really going to have to enforce.
Jeanine, that was a heavy sigh. What, is there a story around that, or what?
Well, yeah, I do have a story around that actually, because when we moved over to having our entire organization using the calendar, it was a bit of a push because people were really attached to their paper calendars. There was something about having the tactile feel of a planner that people really didn't want to let go of. And even still, our executive director, she doesn't manage her own calendar, and this is kind of a system where everyone has to participate, otherwise it doesn't work. And we only have one exception, and it's because that staff person has an entirely other staff person to manage a calendar for her. So it really that is a system where it's great, and also you need everyone's cooperation with it for it to work.
Okay. Let's look at, what about file sharing? That sounds like a pretty big topic. Who wants to start off with file sharing? Doesn't matter.
I mean, you've just gone through this big file sharing change.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so my organization was using an internally managed file server, and we've grown a lot over the past few years. So before, really similar to what Lisa had described earlier, we were one location with one person working out of their home office, and they would connect into the server via VPN, and it was okay. But as we've grown over the past few years, we've expanded into a satellite office, 3 different time zones, and now a third of our staff are working outside of that main office. And the connection, people were just not able to access their files, and it was just really, really awful. It was really difficult for people. And so we made the decision to move to cloud file sharing. It's been a really good decision for us, especially because so our remote staff are just so thrilled. It is a transition that required a lot of communication with staff and training and ongoing support. So even though our migration is done, the work is certainly not over with it. And it's definitely that situation where it was not as easy as the vendor had originally expressed. There was a lot more that went into it.
We have to think a lot about the learning curve.
Yes.
And training time, et cetera. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the learning curve and the training are very important, but it's also really changing people's habits about where they keep their files. I mean, if you have a situation like at Jeanine's organization where you can't access the VPN reliably, so you just start storing all of your working documents on your hard drive, then when you fix the situation and get a centralized file repository that works, people are still in the habit of keeping things locally, and getting them to remember to file documents centrally when they're finished, getting them to be familiar with the centralized file structure so they can find the things they need, getting them out of the habit. I mean, I don't know if this was happening to you, Jeanine, but when I was the operations director in this kind of situation, I would get requests from people for me to go on the server and email them a file if they were outside the office. And as you can imagine, it's it's challenging from a time management perspective for everyone to have to do that. But once people are in the habit of it, it can be hard to get them to stop.
Okay, that's excellent. That's encouraging. How do we get the universal buy-in that we need? I mean, Jeanine, you mentioned it for the calendaring, essential, but it's obviously essential for file sharing too. I'm thinking mostly of the structure. Like maybe you do this collaboratively. You come up with the literal file structure, or does one person impose it and say I believe this makes the most sense, and so please comply.
Oh man, I mean that's a really hard one. What did
Jeanine,
you guys do?
Any thoughts? What?
Well, when I initially started this conversation with people at my organization, I asked them what, in an ideal situation, what would they get out? What would they be able to do? What would be a great situation for them? And I think by starting the conversation that way, people felt like they had some say in whatever the new solution was. And not only that, it really helped that I had buy-in from the leadership at my organization. There was a very clear signal to staff that this was the direction that we were going in, and people have to get on the bus. So, yeah.
Okay. So some collaboration and some input gathering, but in the end, somebody's got to decide, and everybody's got to agree.
Pretty much. I mean,
participate even if you don't agree.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Go ahead.
Disagree
Go
and
ahead,
commit
Lisa.
is
Okay.
But I think that, I mean, what I often recommend to clients is that one person, the point person on the file migration project, whoever that is, should be someone who is really familiar with all of the organizational files, and they kind of come up with the top level structure that makes sense and is aligned with the way the organization works. But then as you drill down deeper, people have to have dominion and control over their most direct area of work files, because if you try to impose a taxonomy on people and it doesn't work for them, it's chaos and they will rebel.
All right.
So autonomy is important.
Okay. At least at the more granular level.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the important thing is really that there are some principles that are clear and communicatable to everyone. Clients always come to me and they say, we want an intuitive file directory. And it's like, well, you can't have that, because what's intuitive for one person is not intuitive for somebody else. So as long as you're working off some clear principles that everyone can agree on, that's what you want to aim for.
Okay. Jeanine, anything you want to add to the file sharing conversation?
Not right now,
No?
I don't think. Yeah.
Okay. What else we have? Chat.
Chat.
What are the issues around chat?
Some people don't like to log in to chat, and I think that for me, in the organizations that I've worked in, the most effective uses of chat are when people are just in the habit of logging in the morning. So there's the presence visibility indicator. I'm here, I'm not here yet, I'm in a meeting, and that is a really, really easy way to communicate to your coworkers where you are and if you're available. But again, it's a big habit shift for some people. I was doing a kind of part-time gig at a very, very large organization with 2 offices, and 20,000 people in the whole organization and 100 people in my kind of immediate department. And there were a few people who just never logged in. It's like, I saw this person, I know she's here, but her chat says that she is presence unknown. And so, you can't make people, unfortunately.
So what do you end up doing? And this could apply beyond chat to any of the areas we're talking about. What do you do with the people who are recalcitrant? Anybody? Good. Who has a suggestion? What do you do?
There's a whole methodology of change management. It's a whole field of study. And so I think that, like any technology project, but particularly distance collaboration, really delving into change management and having a plan for it, which involves communication, training, reinforcement, it's complicated.
Okay,
well that's an important thing to know. Anything more, Jeanine? You want?
I'll just echo that getting people to change their habits can be really difficult. Or a lot of times people at my organization will log in, but they won't update statuses. So I'll just wonder, wow, is that person unavailable all day? All day they're unavailable.
Yeah.
Am I going to be interrupting them in something really important if I am them? But it's, I think I will say that for the people that use it, it is great.
Okay, so a good outcome is definitely
Yeah.
achievable again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have one, I think my kind of most successful change management story is very, very small, but at an old employer, one of the things that I had to do was get people to fill out their online timesheets, and no one wanted to do it because that's a slog, and it is, they perceive it as a waste of time, and it kind of is, except that I was in charge of the bookkeeping, and I couldn't allocate our totals for the month properly and close the books until everyone in the organization had filled out their timesheets. And so reminders didn't work. Nothing worked until, and this, I think this is particularly indicative of small organizations where people really have each other's backs, is I just said to everyone, I was like, look, you guys, you're making my life a lot harder. There's this crucial task that I can't do and prevents us from getting accurate financial reports. And you're making my life frustrating because you're not doing this. And that was the thing that got people to do it.
All right, some guilt.
I like to think of it more as a personal connection. If you want to say
Sounds
guilt,
like guilt to
okay.
me. All right.
Okay.
All right. The guilt-
Accountability to your coworkers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was getting them to really understand why they had to do this piece of bureaucratic work, that it actually had meaning in the organization. It wasn't just a piece of bureaucratic work.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank
Great.
you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My guests have been Lisa Jervis, Principal Consultant for Information Ecology, and Jeanine Shimatsu, IT Specialist at Forward Together. It's nonprofit radio coverage of NTC, Nonprofit Technology Conference 2015. Thanks so much for being with us.